56 years of war on cancer. It makes Vietnam look like something crazy. It makes the Korean War look like something crazy. It makes World War II look like something crazy. It makes World War I look like something crazy. But see, within the confines of culture, it's been accepted. War nonetheless. The war does one thing very well. It destroys. It doesn't matter who it's declared war on or who it's directed to wage war on. It destroys. And so the war on cancer, it's the myth.
Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now.
Cancer myths versus cancer truths. Now, this is going to be the first podcast of a series of 7 and maybe even a bonus episode where I'm going to go in a deep dive on 7 different topics. Again, one possible bonus of a 45-minute lecture that I'm going to be giving at the Annie Appleseed Conference at the end of February 27th, 28th in 2026 down in West Palm Beach. Now, if you are not first familiar with the Annie Appleseed Conference, it's one that you need to be familiar with, an organization you need to be familiar with. They are the only conference that I know of that actually in the arena of cancer and integrative oncology bring patients and doctors together in the same space. It is a unique engagement. It's one I love to be a part of because it allows me to basically be right there with people that I serve that are not necessarily my patients. So I can empower them directly, but it also gives me an opportunity to really encourage them and give them the self-empowerment to lead their own healthcare. And that's what this talk is about. Again, this is the first of a deeper dive of a 7-part that will be presented there. So what I want to do in this talk is separate fact from fiction and understand the real science behind some of these common misconceptions, dare I say misinformation, or dare I say disinformation, and understand these facts, dispel the myths, and empower you, the patient, the family of patients, or even doctors for better prevention, early detection, even targeted treatment, as well as healing potential. And so the outline of this talk and of this podcast series is going to be war, exclamation point. The systemic fallacy. Presence does not equal function. Know your number. Diet is irrelevant. Cancer is a genetic disease. Resistance is futile. And innovation is dead. So we're going to talk here about war. The war on cancer. Knowledge is power. And we're going to dispel and separate fact from fiction here and look at this war myth versus war truth in cancer. It really makes me think of the second in the series of the Lord of the Rings trilogy in Isengard when they're standing up there at the top of the castle at Isengard, and he says, "To war!" He's declaring war on men. And so when we declare on war on cancer, just like what was declared there in Isengard, it was war on everybody around, right? The hobbits, the forest, everybody was involved, man, etc. It wasn't just men, elves were involved. It was the entire demographics of the entire Middle Earth. Sorry if you're not a Lord of the Rings person, but as a guy, I just loved it. But I think that actually has comparison to when we go to war on cancer. We're going to war on everything that is that individual. And yes, the immune system is front and center. So I want to focus on this war cancer timeline because I think it really tells us a lot of information about what's going on here. First, in 1907, the magic bullet theory was proposed by Paul Ehrlich, and here he introduced the concept of using an individual chemical for the treatment of one disease. So one chemical for one disease. That's actually where we got chemotherapy. Again, one chemical, one therapy, one disease. Chemotherapy had nothing to do with cancer. And it was actually the suggested here of use of salvaricane for the treatment of neurosyphilis. That's actually where it came from, the magic bullet theory. And we still are shackled by that thought process today. But that was first declared again by Paul Ehrlich in 1907. Now, that concept of chemical therapy was basically built upon in a series of steps. In 1915, Fritz Haber basically carried this into World War I for the purpose of chemical warfare. And he was called the father of chemical warfare. And he actually, by the way, had a nickname called Dr. Death, and a quote that you would say famous, but it's really, it shouldn't be famous, but it is. Death is death, however, it is inflicted. So here, something for good was turned for something that was bad. And even worse was Fritz Haber's wife, Clara Haber, who said this before she committed suicide. What Fritz Haber has gained during these 8 years, I have lost, and what's left of me fills me with the deepest dissatisfaction. So basically, it led to her taking her own life, how he had taken the use of one chemical for the treatment of one disease and used it for the broad spectrum, basically destruction on the battlefield, and taking it to chemical warfare. So from World War I to World War II, not much happened on that front. But what happened in World War II, and of course they weren't supposed to be using chemical warfares in World War II like they were World War I, but in World War II, the Allies basically caught wind that maybe the Nazis were going to be trying to advance and move chemical warfare in the European theater. So what they did is, under stealth, they moved mustard gas into the European area, and a German air raid bombed one of the ships that was carrying them in Bari, Italy. This is called Little Pearl Harbor. Look it up if you've never heard about it. It's not Big Pearl Harbor, but Little Pearl Harbor. And what really happened here is the observation, the results of this actually became the foundation for modern chemotherapy as it relates to cancer treatment. Because what happened is, after this bombing at Little Pearl Harbor, where they had all the release of what turned out to be mustard gas, immediately for a few hours, people that were swimming in the ocean, etc., and the water that was contaminated didn't show any ill effects. But then 6 hours or shortly thereafter, they started to become massively sick and would respond to no treatment at all. And so basically massive symptoms, progressive, aggressive symptoms, leading to broad death of many different soldiers that survived actually the bombing, but were exposed to a chemical. So obviously the military took interest of this, and in 1943, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Alexander was tasked with an investigative report via the Allied forces to look into what happened here, the bombing of the American ship John Harvey. Now, what he found was that the source of the death of all these soldiers at Bari, Italy, Little Pearl Harbor, was that the American ship, the John Henry, was carrying mustard gas. Now, the initial report actually was squashed by the British military. They didn't want that out there. So obviously, because it was it was going against the Geneva Convention, etc. But they were moving it because they were concerned the Nazis were wars. That's why you really want to avoid war. It's just nasty all the way around. You try to put rules on war, but war by its nature has no rules. So, but he still kept the report because they tried to squash it, but he still kept that report there because he thought it was important. So hats off to him. But then Colonel Cornelius P. Dusty Rhodes, a really good name, said, well, I want to look into this, because he was actually chief of the medical division of the chemical warfare department. Isn't it interesting that the warfare department has a medical division? You can understand, well, warfare, yes, we have to medically be able to treat what is exposed to in war, but here it's because, well, the war is actually using chemicals and we need the medical division to really propagate it. That's actually really where it was going. And so he took an interest in Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Alexander's report. And so what he did is he said, you know what, I think I can make use of this report. So then in August 8, 1945, Colonel Cornelius P. Dusty Rhodes then went and met with two people by the name of Alfred P. Sloan Jr. and Charles F. Kettering to announce funding, but what ended up being a meeting that led to funding and the beginning of Fort Detrick, Maryland being turned in part from a military complex to wage war, to actually then pivot to actually use chemicals to wage war on cancer and in turn wage war on the body. This was the Institute, the original foundation for the Institute for Cancer Research. War begets war begets war. I mean, war does one thing: it destroys. It doesn't matter who the war is declared on, who are the collateral damages that are the collateral populations affected. It's nonetheless destruction. That is what war does. So in 1971, President Nixon actually declared war on cancer in his State of the Union address. Now, it wasn't Congress that was declaring war, but the president stood up there and declared war on cancer. And as far as I know, it's the only disease that in the United States actually a president has declared war on it. Not diabetes, not Lou Gehrig's, not Parkinson's, but war. So that's why we have this war on cancer. It's war footing, it's a war mentality, it's war vernacular. Everything is about fight, win, go to war. And so this is where that process has come. Chemotherapy, and that's why we're going to be starting there first, it was literally born out of war. And so it is going to then take its next steps right on into war. So where we are today is that there is a questioning of this war mentality, this war focus in the paradigm. There's a growing recognition that the war metaphor, I think it's more than a metaphor, it's actually war. It's limiting our approach to cancer treatment. You can lay down a timeline here, not just of these specific details led to this discovery that led to then the cancer research with Sloan and Kettering, but that war begets medicine. See, this began in the disease department. Paul Ehrlich said, I'm going to treat disease with one chemical. And that was great, and it was successful. But then that disease department became the war department. And then that war department became very focused and precise in the cancer department. It wanted to bring maximum force, maximum damage, very targeted damage to this process. And that then became war on the body. Again, when you talk about going to war, there's the enemy that you go to war on, and then there are the innocent bystanders, if you will, the collateral damage that are not those directly involved in the direct battlefield confrontation, but in those surrounding. And that's what happens with the body. Particularly, that's what happens to the immune system. It is the collateral damage. The body is the collateral damage. That is the war on cancer, which is war on the body. And so here, the war on the body turns to the disease department because the immune system, the war approach damages the immune system, which is the body's defenses. So in essence, it's going to war on how the body defends against invaders, foreign and domestic. And thus, it's going to affect the disease department. And what it does is it creates a perpetual cycle where going to war does nothing but perpetuates destruction and disease, because all it does is spread collateral damage. And so in a way, war creates constant clients, customers. People talk about the perpetual nature of the war industrial complex. Well, that war industrial complex basically was engrafted in, or it in turn engrafted in the medical to become the medical war industrial complex. And so what you can see is one begets the next. They're going to have the same goals and they're going to have the same outcomes. They're designed to destroy. But here it's just war on cancer, but it becomes war on the body. And what's interesting about this, I heard this from Glenn Beck on a quote. I listen to a lot of different podcasts because I love to podcast. But he had a really great quote. He said, World War II showed us how good we have gotten at killing people. It was quite a statement. I was out jogging and I heard that statement and it kind of stopped me. Thought, wow. So that's what history looks back on World War II. How good we'd gotten, how precise we had gotten in our ability to not just kill enemies, but kill thousands and thousands and thousands of enemies simultaneously. So it really put the war on cancer metaphor into a very different context in my mind. So that same lethal efficiency, that was applied on the battlefield here, applied to war and cancer, is applied to disease. But when you go to war, those therapeutics, here I'm talking about something like chemotherapy, it struggles to distinguish between the direct enemy here, cancer, and the surrounding healthy tissue. That's collateral damage. And this leads to widespread collateral damage and creates a cycle of required, ongoing medical intervention because of the constant collateral damage. Basically, we seed disease. So I was thinking about that quote, World War II. What about World War III? What would a quote about World War III be in? That if World War II shows how effectively we could kill people, what would World War III show us? Well, what if we've already had World War III, or we're in the middle of World War III? What if World War III was not necessarily fought in the Pacific theater against another country or another country's allies, or in the European theater against other countries allied? What if the war pivoted from war on the battlefield to war on the body? And instead of the enemy being another country, the enemy was cancer and the collateral damage was the immune system. See, I actually think this proficiency for killing actually moved from the destruction of people in a war, actual war setting on the battlefield. It actually moved to the human body by going to war on the cancer. So the proficiency, so just as the war mentality moved to the war on cancer and war on the body, the proficiency of killing equally moved from the battlefield, the military complex, to the medical industry. And you see this, it kills cancer cells, right? It does do that. Here I'm talking about, again, chemotherapy, but it sure kills healthy cells really bad. And I was just talking to a potential patient this morning, her daughter, because her mother could not get on there. She was diagnosed in December with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, a quality of life measure score, ECOG, of 1, able to do everything, drive everything she needed to do. They delayed treatment for over 3 weeks because of the holidays. From that standpoint, then what happened is she ended up having jaundice, so elevated bilirubin, because of biliary obstruction, had to do a biliary drain, then a biliary stent. That basically seeds bacteria, makes treatment difficult for pancreatic cancer when that happens. But then had one cycle of Gemzar and Abraxane, one cycle, and their quality of life score down to a 3 or 4, probably a 4, because when I was trying to talk to her and had to talk to her daughter, she was in the bed vomiting and really couldn't get out and had no idea when her next treatment would be, if she was able, because she had missed 2 successive chemotherapy treatments, because one cycle had basically gone to war so much, had created so much collateral damage that she really hadn't recovered yet. So that's the picture of war. And basically it had done great harm to her body, great harm to her immune system. And the question is, will it recover? And the time, really the outcome of that is still unknown. And I hate to see that, but let me tell you what, that story is not rare. Happens a lot. Patients undergo war on cancer treatment strategy and they never recover. They never recover. So there's something that I call the unholy trinity. It's really therapeutics that were built on this concept of war. Of course, chemotherapy is front and center. Surgery and radiation. Now, collectively, all 3 of these are in a way born out of war or modulated or modified through the process of war. And so this unholy trinity shows how things here being born out of war into the medical industry really have a propensity to destroy the body. And our job as physicians is to actually heal. We're not military personnel. Yes, we want to destroy the tumor, but we want to work to heal and preserve the body at the same time. That's very different. So the word physician, Raphe, means healer. Healer. It doesn't mean that those are they that wage war. We're not foot soldiers, we're not Marines, we're not Air Force, we're not missiles. Now, we can destroy tumor, but preserve the body at the same time. And I think the war complex and the war mentality has blinded medicine in a significant way that patients understand. Some doctors are beginning to understand, and I think we need to really learn from our mistakes and move on for the benefit of patients. So let's look at the dark side of chemotherapy. What we know about chemotherapy is it, again, literally was born out of war, World War I, World War II, but it has a very dark side. Paradoxically, it progresses cancer. It will spread it. It will shrink a primary tumor, but it will progress the spread of the tumor. And this has been shown via a variety of ways. At the end of this podcast, you can check out the show notes because the supporting evidence will be there. It promotes treatment resistance. You all know this. Patients will receive chemotherapy, it will respond for a time, and then the tumor develops resistance to it. It also not only promotes resistance, it not only promotes the progression of it, but it prepares the distant soil for metastasis to be able to settle and grow. So that is what's called the seed and soil theory. So it goes to these distant soils, if you will, bone, liver, etc., and it prepares that soil like a farmer, just waiting for the time to drop the seed. And then chemotherapy, though prepping the distant soil, it's also increasing the circulating tumor cells. Those are the seeds that then spread throughout the body that then reach that distant soil that's been prepared for that seed to then sprout, take hold, bear fruit. But here, there's no fruit. It's thorns. It's destruction. So though I use this kind of farming mentality and this farming metaphor that is good, here it's actually bad. And it also hits the immune system hard. Chemotherapy will actually shift the immune system within the tumor microenvironment to be more pro-tumor and less anti-tumor. So for example, macrophages are recruited to the tumor microenvironment, but some of these chemotherapies will polarize them from a M1, which is anti-tumor, to M2, and this creates an immunosuppressive tumor immune microenvironment. Same thing happens with tumor-associated neutrophils. And so this immune suppression allows the cancer to evade the immune system. What are the key rate-limiting steps in how cancer survives, thrives, and spreads? But something that's interesting that is new, you may not have heard of, is chemotherapy induces cell senescence. And here I'm talking about immunosenescence. Now, these are cells that are not dead, but they're no longer growing, but yet they remain metabolically active. I wouldn't even say they're in a deep sleep. They're just there. They're not growing. They're not replicating. They remain metabolically active, and they produce what are called senescent-associated secretory phenotype. So what this is where these kind of just metabolically active but non-replicating cells, here immune cells or cancer cells, they promote inflammatory signaling. And so what here can happen with cancer is cancer can induce cell senescence of surrounding cells to the tumor. And so these surrounding healthy cells may not be immune cells, but here the surrounding cells actually start to produce a lot of inflammation, and so they are hijacked to actually promote neighboring tumor growth, but it's the healthy cells that are hijacked because of this cell senescence induced by cancer cells. But of course, the impact on the immune system creates immunosenescence, so it's basically decreasing the replication and activity of the immune cells, but they still remain metabolically active, again, compromising the immune system. Now, radiation is really interesting. I mean, chemotherapy, I think, is something everybody's familiar with. We all know about it. It's directly born out of war. It's a very straight connection, but radiation is really interesting. I call it the paradox within the paradox within the paradox within the paradox within the paradox, because radiation, let's be honest, it's a treatment tool, just like chemotherapy. If you go, well, we need to kill these rapidly dividing cells, what can do it? Chemotherapy does a great job. But it's not precise. It's not specific at all. Radiation's the same. It's a treatment tool in cancer. It's effective in killing rapidly dividing cells. But it too creates massive collateral damage, which we'll dive into in a second. But here's interesting also, the paradox within a paradox is radiation is a carcinogen. Chernobyl, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, radiation is a carcinogen. It drives recurrence, the paradox within a paradox within a paradox. It enables and promotes metastasis by damage to the immune system, the paradox within a paradox within a paradox within a paradox. And then the last paradox is it causes new secondary cancers. So radiation is a paradox within a paradox within a paradox within a paradox within a paradox. And yet, it's one of our mainstream therapies for cancer treatment. That's why I have it as one of the two, or one of the three, but here number two, unholy trinity. There's many different mechanisms of how radiation can do it. When we look at metastasis, it actually promotes dormant micrometastasis through a process called concomitant tumor resistance. So what's been seen in the literature is really interesting, is that when a large tumor is destroyed with radiation or with chemo, distant small tumor metastatic sites pop up really quick, too quick for it to be a byproduct of the radiation or of the surgical resection. And so there's this theory that's now been proved out to be true, probably in some cases, not all, but what's called concomitant tumor resistance, where when you destroy that primary dominant tumor, it removes a counter-inhibitory control over distant dormant micrometastatic sites. So you remove that dominant negative signal, and now those distant dormant micrometastatic sites have a chance to start to grow, and grow so very quickly because, quote unquote, Big Brother is no longer there to keep them in check. This is a process called immune editing. Now, radiation also induces oncogenic metabolism. It drives oncogenic or metabolic reprogramming, like what we talk about so much in cancer, helping cancer to adapt and survive in new environments. We always talk about the Warburg effect. That's where cancer is using sugar via glycolysis in an environment where typically other cell cycle processes to make energy are in place. Glycolysis is a normal metabolic process to make ATP out of energy, but it's typically present in a healthy environment, in an anaerobic environment. But in an aerobic environment, in the Warburg effect, what happens is cancer is using glucose to promote accelerated ATP production, but sacrificing efficiency. That's more ATP. So a molecule of glucose gives 8 molecules of ATP, whereas if it went through glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, it'd make 38. So that's the process. It sacrifices that efficiency that takes time because it needs it now. It's greedy. And then also radiation promotes circulating tumor cell release, and also it promotes stem cells. Now, both of these are very complex issues to understand, because circulating tumor cells are tumor cells that are released from the primary tumor. Here, radiation would cause release of them as it destroys. Understand, circulating tumor cells, they're not isolated on themselves. They're released with other agents with them, other cells such as platelets, which protect them. It's called the cancer cell platelet aggregate. So cancer cell, circulating tumor cell platelet aggregates, that helps to protect it as it's circulating the shear force and the immune system. But also understand that radiation induces polarization of stem cells. See, it used to be thought that there was this hierarchy model of cancer cells that lack stem activity and cancer cells that have stem activity. But just as I talked about with macrophages and neutrophils being this polarizing shift based on the environment, that same can apply here to cancer cells and cancer stem cells. There's a polarization shift. That's the new paradigm of thought as it relates to stem cells. So the radiation induces these circulating tumor cell releases, as well as the cancer stem cell polarization. Are we seeding health or are we seeding disease? I was trained as an OBGYN, and what I saw with the pregnancy and the birth of the child is that the vitality and the health of the child begins long before birth. The immune system is vital to the protection of the child, and it's seeded through breast milk. It's seeded through the birth process, whether vaginal versus C-section, but it's seeded during pregnancy in utero, and it actually is seeded long before that. Research has actually shown that maternal nutrition alters the gut microbiome, and this then in turn seeds the gut microbiome of the child transplacentally, and then that compounds the birth and the breastfeeding process. So if we want to actually change the reaping of the disease that we're sowing today from what we've sowed, we need to actually change and seed health and vitality in our children. So I ask you to check out the company Needed, who I trust, because they're a company designed to actually seed health and nutrition in women, in mothers. They also have a line that supports men and sperm count, because it takes two to form a healthy offspring. I encourage you to check out the descriptions below for access to this company that I trust, Needed, and thank you for your support. Now, it's important to understand that, yes, radiation kills cancer, but in a process that was first described by Frankel and Kimball in 1914, they found that the metastatic frequency was significantly higher in tumors that were pre-irradiated than in controlled tumors that were not irradiated. Now, you may go, well, that makes sense. That makes no sense. I thought radiation is designed to kill, but here, pre-irradiation to the tumor bed actually promoted, and the way it did it is promoted metastasis through hypoxia, through invasive growth, and through neoangiogenesis. So here with chemotherapy and now with radiation, the very treatment, the very thing designed to kill the cancer is setting the stage for the cancer recurrence or the cancer to spread. And that's why I say it's a short-term victory for a long-term loss in this quote-unquote, if we're going to use a metaphor, war on cancer. Again, shown in chemotherapy, shown in radiation. So here is actually a study published in 2025, so a very recent study entitled Radiation-Induced Amphoregulin Drives Tumor Metastasis. Again, check out the show notes, it will be there. So what's interesting about this is radiation increases metastasis via what these authors called the abscopal effect. Now, the abscopal effect, something I talk about, that we talk about at the Williams Cancer Institute. Ab meaning away from, scopus meaning target, away from target. Now here it's bad scopal effect. So what they found is that radiation here was triggering amphoregulin secretion. And they were using here local stereotactic. Now, stereotactic radiation is born out of the recognition that wide field radiation was bad. It destroyed healthy cells. It created that tumor bed effect, right? It recruited the collateral healthy cells to do its dirty work, as I was just describing. But here, this stereotactic pinpoint radiation forced cancer cells to secrete amphoregulin. And this was a paradoxical driver of metastasis. So here's how it was shown to do. Amphoregulin acts on distant immune cells, specifically myeloid-derived suppressing cells. And these create immunosuppressive environments in distant metastatic niches. So here, if you think about, well, this is interesting. Chemotherapy can actually toil the soil of distant site, preparing for the seed that's released via circulating tumor cells. The radiation can pretty much do the same thing. Here, radiation is causing the release of amphoregulin, which is going to those distant areas and basically recruiting immune cells that are immunosuppressive. So thus, when these cells arrive, they're allowed to evade the immune system locally, breaking down your defenses. So in this pre-metastatic niche, it then brings back in that concept of the seed and soil hypothesis, which was first proposed by Stephen Paget in 1889. Isn't it fascinating? The very treatment designed to destroy cancer and protect the body and preserve life is that which really initiates the beginning of the metastatic process, which is where 90% of morbidity and mortality is. And then it promotes metastatic outgrowth. And it basically precipitates immune reprogramming. So it's creating immunosuppression that's creating immune reprogramming. 2025 study. How about a 2013? You said, Dr. Goodyear, this is all new. So nobody knew. Well, there was a 2013 study entitled Severe Treatment-Related Lymphopenia in Patients with Newly Diagnosed Rectal Cancer Undergoing Neoadjuvant Chemoradiation is Associated with Worse Survival. Now, this is a really interesting study because now this was retrospective. It was looking just at rectal cancer patients. And they said, well, let's look at overall survival, disease-free survival, as well as tumor response. And so they did chemo radiation prior to surgical resection. They followed the lymphocyte levels before chemo radiation, during, and then after. And then they looked at those parameters. And what they found was a massive, massive toil on the immune system, significant increase in severe lymphopenia. These are decreased lymphocytes below 0.5 10 to the 9th power. This would be grade 3, grade 4 lymphopenia from the chemo chemotherapy radiation combination neoadjuvantly given before surgical resection. They found a significant negative impact on survival. They found a significant decrease in overall survival. Now, interestingly enough, radiation had the worst impact. Chemotherapy was second, but still had a significant impact. There was a decrease in disease-free survival. There was higher recurrence rates, and there was decreased tumor response rates from neoadjuvant chemo radiation. The treatment designed to kill the cancer set the stage for its survival and the individual's demise. It reduced tumor response. Less response, statistically significant, retrospective, not prospective, now, in the patients who received the chemotherapy and radiation. But it was garnered by that lymphopenia because what was happening, the lymphocytes, that's the body's defenses. Here, the very treatment is destroying the body's defense, which sets the stage, which shows you how important the immune system is to this fight. It sets the stage for the cancer to spread, impacting survival. The impact here is on CD8 cytotoxic T cells, T memory cells, natural killer cells, even antigen presentation, completely disengaging the immune system from the process of fighting the tumor. Basically making this immune environment within the tumor microenvironment deserted of any immune cells, what's called an immune desert. Thus setting the stage for cancer to survive, evade the immune system, and thrive at an accelerated rate. Now, this, of course, is what I mentioned in the rectal cancer from 2013, but it's been shown in glioblastoma, markedly reducing survival, impairing treatment response moving forward, pancreatic cancer, overall decreased survival, higher recurrence risk, and worse response to therapy, non-small cell lung cancer, worse overall survival, worse progression-free survival, a decreased immunotherapy response, esophageal cancer, decreased survival, reduced pathological response, cervical cancer, worse outcome, decreased tumor control, head and neck cancer. You see a repetitive theme here. Decreased local regional control, worse overall survival, breast cancer, worse prognosis, reduced therapeutic response, melanoma, decreased survival, and worse immunotherapy outcomes. So here it's being repetitively shown in different tumor types, and yet chemotherapy, radiation, the first two of the unholy trinity, are constantly employed. Yes, they damage tumor cells, but they do great, irreparable damage to the immune system. And you might even say, yes, it's damning. It's damaging the immune system. So it creates early onset damage. It's treatment induced. It's occurring frequently in every patient population, in every patient in that 2013, in many different tumor types. And in many cases, I would say it does not recover. It turns the body into the battlefield, and the immune system as a direct collateral damage. What I tell people is, like, understand, they're trying to kill rapidly dividing cells with chemotherapy, even radiation. Cancer cells are not the only thing rapidly dividing. Your immune cells happen to be one of the most rapidly dividing cells, and we need them recruited to that immune environment. And so instead of initiating war with chemotherapy and radiation on the tumor, the best thing there would be to actually engage the immune system, because now in that study, again retrospectively, but in all those different other types of solid tumors, the immune system is now disengaged. It's been directly made to be disengaged because of the initial treatment employed. Engage the immune system first. This has been shown by doing it via PEF prior to surgical resection. You engage the immune system. Intratumoral immunotherapy prior to chemoimmunotherapy engages the immune system. You get better response. We need the immune system in this fight. And then the last tier of the unholy trinity is the surgical imperative. See, I'm a pelvic floor surgeon by training, and I love history. Dr. Benjamin Rush wrote in a letter to Abby Adams Smith, the daughter of one of our presidents in 1811, he said, "The remedy is the knife. I repeat again, let there be no delay in flying to the knife." It'd be like going to a surgeon or going to an orthopedic surgeon and be shocked and flabbergasted that the orthopedic surgeon would suggest surgery. It's what a surgeon's trained to do. They're orthopedic, pelvic floor surgeon. I was trained to do surgery. I'm not going to say let's do some pelvic floor exercises, though I was a big advocate for those. You know, we were trained to artfully use surgery to help patients, and it does. Now, this century-old surgical imperative reveals our long-standing aggressive approach to cancer treatments and immense bias. See, he shows that this over-reliance on surgical resection is something that we've been dealing with for a couple hundred years now. Through that process, we've discovered the importance of the immune system. We've discovered what surgical resection does to the immune system and how it impairs the healing environment. Now, don't get me wrong. As I've said, with chemotherapy, radiation, they can be helpful and they have their purpose. If there's high tumor burden, we need that. If there's brain metastasis, we can use stereotactic radiation. We have to understand the downside, though. Surgery remains essential, yet it is overused. And it's time to use it at its limited nature in which it should actually be employed. Because just as I said with chemotherapy and radiation, the surgical metastasis paradox is here as well. It promotes an inflammatory cascade that pushes the cancer to spread, called tumor lysis syndrome, that we heard so much about during the COVID-19 pandemic, where the immune system was stimulated, and that immune system stimulation actually created collateral damage. That's what destroyed the lungs. It wasn't the virus. It was actually the immune system that went haywire. It went off the reservation, if you will. Cancer and surgery here can do the same thing. It promotes an inflammatory cascade that pushes the cancer to spread. It disrupts and reprograms the microenvironment. It actually is immunosuppressive locally at the same time while it's promoting inflammation. And that immunosuppression will depend on the type of surgery, the length of the surgery, how the surgery is delivered, whether it's open, whether it's laparoscopic. This is why I was such an advocate for vaginal surgery versus laparoscopic, better than abdominal, because you saw more immunosuppression. All of this would lead to longer immunosuppressive states. So patients say, with surgery, my tumor spread. Yes, it can, and it can through immunosuppression. The type of surgery, the comorbidities. Are you obese? Are you normal weight? Are you always going in with lymphopenia or immunocompromised? All of these play a role in that process. It promotes invasion and it promotes migration. What's called neutrophil extracellular traps. It's using the immune system to help the tumor evade the immune system locally and then systemically. This allows it to escape the immune system. Again, rate-limiting step in how cancer spreads and survives. It promotes circulating tumor cell release, which is the seed to go to that distant soil. And then it promotes pro-growth proliferation signals that stimulate cancer cell growth locally and distantly when it lands and starts to proliferate in that distant prepared soil. But just as chemotherapy can induce cell senescence, radiation can, surgery can as well. And this is tissue trauma response. So, the tumors were first described in 1986 by the phrase, a wound that does not heal. It kind of makes sense when you think about it, because it's an abnormal immune response in and around the tumor. That's abnormal immune response. It's immune response that's keeping the immune system from attacking the tumor. And so here, a wound that does not heal, when you go in and surgically resect it, you're cutting into a wound that does not heal. And so you're creating a wound within a wound that does not heal. So here, two negatives don't make a positive. And so this induces basically surgically induced cell senescence. This invokes that senescent-associated secretory phenotype, a production of interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-6, C-reactive protein, tumor necrosis factor alpha. Again, not replicating, not growing, but still metabolically active, producing inflammation. And this leads to immunosuppression and compromised immune surveillance. So the immune system is down. So it's not just immunosuppression locally, it's suppressed immunosurveillance systemically. And so this senescent-associated secretory phenotype propagation is spread through inflammatory signaling induced by the very procedure designed to cut out the tumor that's inducing inflammatory dysfunction and immune dysfunction. Beyond these cytokine signals, it also promotes growth factors like transforming growth factor beta, vascular endothelial growth factor. Transforming growth factor beta suppresses the immune system locally. Vascular endothelial growth factor promotes angiogenesis, blood vessel supply growth to support a rapidly growing tumor. fibroblast growth factors, IGF-1, platelet-derived growth factors, and these fuel the tumor growth and metastatic spread. Now, it's really interesting when we say, well, we're winning the war on cancer. Well, 1971 to 2026, that's 29 years, that's 57 years. Wow, that's a long war. That's a long war. And we're not winning the war on cancer. Yeah, there's some tumor types that we're doing well with, but a lot we're not. And when you look at a 2019 study published in Lancet, what's called the Prospective Urban Rural Epidemiology Study, showed a seismic shift where now cancer in adults in high-income countries was causing the mortality rate two and a half times that compared to cardiovascular disease. So most will look at cardiovascular disease as the number one cause of death in adults across the world, but particularly in the United States, but across the world. But what this study showed, looking at high-income countries, they looked at 21 countries, and I'll touch on some specifics of that in a second. But they found that in high-income countries, the mortality rate in adults, it was cancer. And it didn't just eke by cardiovascular disease. It blew by it by a rate of 2.5 to 1. Now, you might say, well, yeah, you're probably looking at Canada, the US, the UK. Of these 21 countries, the highest cancer burden country was Saudi Arabia, and it ranked 14th globally. What would these numbers have looked like? And I don't laugh because I think this was intentional. What would these numbers have looked like if they had simply cut out the other 21 studies and just looked at 1 through 13? It'd be worse. It'd be worse. And the lowest cancer rate was in Brazil. And so this led the lead author from Stanford, Dr. Latha Palaniappan, to call this an epidemiological transition from cardiovascular disease as the number one cause of death in adults to cancer. And we're seeing even more evidence of that. According to the CDC numbers, currently 40.3% of adults are obese, and 74% of adults are either overweight or obese. Now, what this has led to is a spike in age-adjusted mortality rates in obesity-associated cancers. From 1999 to 2020, so 20 years, from 3.73 to 13.52 per million. That's age-adjusted mortality rates for obesity-associated cancer tripling in 20 years. These are cancer types, 13 different cancer types, accounting for 40% of all cancer diagnoses. Esophageal cancer, postmenopausal breast cancer, I would say premenopausal needs to be included, colon and rectal, uterus, gallbladder, stomach, kidneys, renals, liver, ovaries, pancreas, thyroid, meningiomas, multiple myeloma. You see the articles everywhere. Younger and younger people are being diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and doctors are baffled. Pancreatic cancer, earlier and early, doctors are baffled. There's no baffling behind it. You just simply need to look for the dots and then connect them. The problem is we're not taught to connect dots today. We're just taught to collect the dots that we're told to collect. And then if we connect dots that we're not told to collect, if we collect dots that we're not told to collect, we definitely cannot connect them. We can only connect these dots with the way we're taught to connect. See, we're taught not how to think, but what to think. And there it's what to connect. And so that lymphopenia becomes critical because there's research that shows lymphopenia accelerates aging and it accelerates cancer vulnerability, susceptibility. It's because we have a compromised, damaged defense mechanisms. The immune system is down. It's the very treatment that is doing that, that's designed to destroy the tumor. Chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. So the toll of the war on cancer is lymphocyte suppression. Now, it's immune disruption across the board. It disrupts the gut microbiome, topic for a different day. But it compromises the immune system, leaving a chronic lymphocyte suppressed state. And that's where we are with this war on cancer, because what this does is it fuels disease progression. And I would say, though this has not yet been proven, my theory is that this actually is something we're passing on not only to our children, transgenerationally, but also to our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, intergenerationally. We talk about that transmission, transgeneration, and intergenerational epigenetic inheritance. But I would tell you, I think there's evidence here that what we're talking about here with the impact on the immune system is being spread through the legacy, not a legacy of debt, but a legacy of immune disruption. Now, it could be through the gut microbiome, it could be through other mechanisms, but definitely I think the lymphopenia here and the impaired immune surveillance is being inheritable. We are passing this on. And then this, not just a war footing, but also the war on food. So not just the war on cancer, but the war on food. And what that's done through the glyphosate and other things, it's taken the alive soil and turned it into dead dirt. And we have, per the research, 30 to 50% reduction in nutrients like vitamin C. So it's taken something that's alive, that fuels life in food, and it's created dead, nutrient depleted soil that passes on to create nutrient depleted crops that then leads to nutrient depleted produce like cattle and goats, etc. But then we give them hormones and we give them other agents to try to boost them up, which, by the way, they pass on to us when we eat them. And then that's what we eat. So we're a product in this ecological system that is collapsing. We are reaping that which we have sowing. So the harvest we're getting now of disease, of cancer, is one that we propagated ourselves by going to war on cancer, which has damaged the immune system irreparably for generations. And we've gone to war on food with industrial agriculture. And what that's doing is the same thing, but in a different way. So this is a double whammy, and it's really accelerating cancer and vulnerability and aging. And so it's just broad, as you can see, and I don't want to go into lymphopenia here because we can go on and on about that, but radiation, cytotoxic chemotherapy, corticosteroids, targeted therapies, even some of the conventional immunotherapeutics, Tylenol, all of these induce lymphopenia. Now, how many of you, when you go to your oncologist and you get your chemotherapy or you get your immunotherapy, if it's one of those that can cause lymphopenia, in the protocol is going to be Tylenol. You go get surgery, you're going to have prescribed as a part of your post-operative pain control many different types of opiates that have Tylenol in it. Radiation, the same thing. So we're cutting off our nose to spite our face. It's not our nose, we're cutting off each limb, both legs and arms, as we're just blindly going to war. And that's why I say that war industrial complex has just shifted to the medical industrial complex. It's wide spectrum spillover. And where we see that impact is on the gut microbiome. And then add to that three other aspects. The ultra-processed foods, the heavy overuse of antibiotics early, and obesity. I call these the four horsemen. They are leading the charge for this obesity-associated cancer and tripling of age-adjusted mortality rates. You know, when we talk about nutrient depletion from processed diets, that's just not eating really food, as RFK's talked about. I mentioned glyphosate is also leading to nutrient depletion in the soil transferred to the crops, 30 to 50% vitamin C deficiency. But it also leads to vitamin C deficiency, zinc deficiency, vitamin D deficiency. Guess what? Those three right there, immune system compromised right out of the gate. Right out of the gate. So if we're wanting to engage the immune system in an immune desert or even immune excluded tumor immune microenvironment, not going to happen. But it's not just a product of chemotherapy, it's a product of what we've done with the soil, what we've done with our food or not eating food. All of this compounds itself. That's why we can't just say, it's just unholy trinity. No. It's multifactorial. Just as patients say, well, what of these major issues caused my cancer? Yes, it's a collective. It's all of it coming together. And all of this disrupts the microbiome of the child in the womb, growing. They've even had studies that show that the diet of the mother, the gut microbiome, it crosses the placenta. The metabolites cross the placenta into the baby to actually prime the immune system even before birth. So the immune tone of that individual that's born lasting their lifetime begins in their mother's wound. And it begins with what their mother eats. And I would say it probably begins before they're even conceived. And then we're not even talking here about environmental immunotoxins. See, when you look at glyphosate, people go, oh, that glyphosate, it's a political argument. No, it's not. Glyphosate's an antibiotic. Glyphosate got approved because they say, well, humans don't make that pathway, the Shitamaki pathway. Well, the bacteria in our gut do. And so the politicians failed to recognize that we have trillions of bacteria in our gut microbiome. And though the glyphosate may not affect our specific pathways, it affects theirs, which they affect our immune system, which affects us. So the cumulative burden here of the industrialized food pattern, the processed foods, not real food, the early life antibiotic exposure, the obesity, the immunotoxic exposures, all are leading to immune collapse. They're all leading to accelerated aging at the cellular level, immaturity in the immune system, failed immune priming, leading to immune vulnerability that starts early, that then leads to shifting demographics of cancer. That's why we're seeing things like pancreatic cancer in 20s and 30s. That's why we're seeing colorectal cancer in 20s and 30s. Again, it's what we've been farming, it's what we've been toiling, and we're reaping the harvest of that process now. Now, here's the truth. All of that was focusing on war, myths, that's the right approach. Here's the truth. Cancer is a systems failure. It's a collapse of interconnected systems of which the immune system is intimate in that process, including sustained proliferative signaling, evasion of growth suppression, resistance of cell death, enabling replicative immortality, angiogenesis induction, activation of invasion and metastasis, deregulated cellular metabolism, avoiding immune destruction, genomic instability and mutation, tumor-promoting inflammation, phenotypic plasticity, non-mutational epigenetic reprogramming, polymorphic microbiome senescent cells. These are the hallmarks of cancer described by Henneheim and Weinberg in 2000, then 2011, then 2022, with a recent update in, yes, 2026. We can no longer look at cancer as the way to defeat it through war. It's time of 56 years of war on cancer. It makes Vietnam look like something crazy. It makes the Korean War look like something crazy. It makes World War II look like something crazy. It makes World War I look like something crazy. But see, within the confines of culture, it's been accepted. It's war nonetheless. And war does one thing very well. It destroys. Doesn't matter who it's declared war on or who it's directed to wage war on. It destroys. And so the war on cancer, it's the myth. Going to war, the immune system plays no role in the cancer. It's disengaged, as I mentioned with that 2013. The immune system is set aside. The defenses are down. That's the myth. That war on cancer, it's outdated. Doesn't mean we can't use these chemotherapy, radiation, surgery at precise moments. We just have to pivot away from the war mentality, because the truth is, cancer progression, really cancer initiation and progression, reflects multiple system failures occurring simultaneously, resulting in immune dysfunction and immune failure. So the immune system is at the beginning and the progression of the disease, and the spread of the disease, and the termination of the individual with the disease. Why should we add into that process, that sequence, with therapies that are designed to make it worse? Let's first engage the immune system, and then let's see what those defenses will do. So I hope this deep dive of step 1, war on cancer, has been helpful. And again, if you were at the Annie Appleseed Conference, understand that the other podcast that will accompany the short, brief summary of that 45-minute lecture will be following in sequence as well. If you weren't there, I encourage you to check out Annie Appleseed. Check them out next year. You could be there, and I actually may get to meet you in person. And as always, again, check out the show notes of this podcast, because there is going to be the evidence supporting all of these statements. You may say, Dr. Goodyear, these are wild statements. And there's a whole lot of evidence to support these not so wild statements. It's time to stop declaring war on cancer. And it's time to start healing, and that begins with preserving but engaging the immune system. We need your help also because you as patients are the force vector of change. I'd like to tell you that it's doctors that will change the future of medicine. It's patients, it's you. So I encourage you to share this with those that would benefit, friends, family, loved ones with cancer, family that are affected by cancer, so that they can also engage in this movement. It's a movement that has actually worked to bring cancer treatment back to its purpose, serving you, the patient. More than that, healing you, the patient. So please, like, share, subscribe to this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and I'll see you on this next Cancer Myths versus Cancer Truth podcast series.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribe Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.